Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm delighted that you agreed to participate in this second analyst meeting to try to find ways to bring our extraordinary field knowledge into the world stage, the socio-political dynamics that are absolutely horrific and show no signs of getting better. And I genuinely believe we have so much to offer, and we're just, all we need is some permutation of what we're presently doing, and we can actually make a difference. So anyway, I will ask you to do some short introductions and talk about your takeaways from the first meeting, whether you participated or watched it. I did want to say one thing, though. 3 of the original participants decided not to continue because they were uncomfortable with the public element of this. And so I sort of wanted to address that. They asked me why I thought it was important that we make this public. And I think because we're talking about the socio-political dynamics, that we need to bring the outside world into the room somehow. Without that, it's individual people talking about individual issues, and it will become an individual group therapy or something different. But if we have the outside world in the room, and we know they're there because they will be listening, some of them, that we'll be thinking a little differently. We'll talk a little bit differently. We'll be concerned about how they're hearing us and what we're hearing from them. And I think it will shift the dynamics a little bit. I often think of this as an inside-out version of the analytic process. In other words, take every rule that Freud dictated and do the opposite. So it's not private, it's public. It's, there's no power differential. There's no money changing hands. It's 3 to 5 times a year rather than 3 to 5 times a week. And it's on Zoom, which again is new only because Zoom is new. It's a positive side effect of a hideous pandemic that we're able to do this at all. So I'm thinking of this as some kind of inside-out permutation of the analytic process that will help us analyze large group conflicts. It'll take it away from the individual, the personal, the psychopathological, and help us think about liberals and conservatives, Jews and Palestinians, racial issues, gender issues, generational issues, as larger themes rather than problems that we as individuals have. Anyway, that's my speech. As far as my takeaway, just a couple of things that, Lynn, I loved your line at the beginning. What did you say? Art is what psychoanalysis looks like in public. Yeah. I think that's something that's not only a gem to think about, but also something that we can work toward. Because if we can create a piece of art, if we can come up with something that's beautiful and truthful and compelling and original, a lot of people's eyes will turn. So
I took that from a twisted Cornel West statement that justice is what love looks like in public. That's where I got that.
Very good. I love doing that. You take, other people's ideas and just twist them a little bit. Yeah. Make them yours. But I think it's something to think about if we can sort of come together in ways that paint a picture of something new that we could actually be useful. The other issues were, paradigms coming apart. Is our country coming apart because we no longer have our identity that the founding fathers based it on? Is God coming apart? Is psychoanalysis coming apart? And I like to think that, yes, that's true, but also paradigm shifts happen and things come apart before paradigm. I think, Katrina, you might have said that, that things have to fall apart before they can be put together in new ways. So we're maybe at that stage where that's happening, and maybe it's not a terrible thing, maybe it's a necessary thing. The other issue that came up that I think was a sore spot, not so much during the meeting, but afterwards, the group got, was troubled by something Katrina said about how she thought our country was founded on a Christian foundation, Christian sort of moral compass, and that's coming apart now. And it seemed like an interesting idea at the time, but afterwards there was a lot of email back and forth about somehow the idea was disturbing.
I want to correct you, Alice. In the group, I said that I would have liked Katrina to at least have said Judeo-Christian.
Judeo-Christian, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Anyway, it continued from there. If this were an analysis, that would be the place where I would say, there's something here, that an issue that we might talk about. And God, that's the other theme that happened. And anyway, that's my takeaway. You guys take it to your turn. Who wants to go next?
Well, I'll go next just because I was the first one. I'm a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst. I live in northern New Jersey, just outside of Manhattan. I'm the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. I'm very interested in groups and group work. I've always been kind of ambivalent about a classical analysis because my own analysis was not terribly helpful. I'm a great admirer of Alice and what she's trying to do. I did not want to continue after the last time. Once I saw one of the very angry responses we got from somebody from the public. And just the idea that this is being taped still continues to be difficult for me. But I thought, if you guys are coming in and there's 3 new people and some men, we were all women the last time, I wanted to see what this was going to be like. So I'm ready to try again.
I can go next. I'm Katrina, but Austin, Texas, and I'm a therapist here, and I'm still in training in terms of becoming a psychoanalyst in the advanced stages of that, and hopefully we'll be done with the training soon. I did enjoy the first conversation. I certainly am interested in exploring further what I said and what you picked up on, Alice, which is that the U.S. is a Christian country founded on Christian principles, and that over the course of decades, even centuries, we've lost a lot of that moral compass. We've lost the kind of Christian unity that used to unite us. And now it's sort of, we're kind of in the shattered glass of multiplicity, so to speak, in which it's your truth, my truth, there's sort of nothing that unites people anymore. And, a lot of kind of thinkers and writers I'm following, they're talking about the post-Christian West and what is that and what are we living in? And, I've really become persuaded that a lot of the troubles that we see, the sociopolitical problems, the increased mental health problems, especially among young people, they really have to do with this loss of our shared religion and the morality, the shared morality that came with that. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'm certainly interested in exploring that topic more if there's interest in the group. One thing that I am not a fan of, that sort of always feels dishonest to me, is when the people I'm in conversation with sort of take an approach of tone policing or don't say the quote unquote naughty words rather than engaging with the substance of the argument. So if there's interest in engaging with the substance of the argument, I'm very interested in having that conversation.
I'll go next. I'm Lynn. I was a part of the original conversation, and along with Katrina and Sylvia. I loved the original conversation. Man, when I rewatched it this weekend to get ready for this, I thought, we just covered a lot of ground. It was really fun and important, and so I was eager to jump back in. I'm a retired advanced practice nurse and nurse practitioner. I worked for 27 years, mostly in an outpatient clinic at Vanderbilt University. Since my retirement, I've been involved in social justice issues. I'm a Kingian nonviolent trainer, and so really involved in the public life. So it doesn't bother me at all that this will go out to the public. I think that has to be. So glad to be with you all.
So I guess I'll go next. I'm Jack Lample. My background, I'm not an analyst or even a therapist. I survived and thrived in a multi-decade analysis, and as a result of that, became quite interested in the unconscious. My career field is in group relations in the Tavistock tradition. So I've been working for 20 some years, including being one of the people who put together 2 online conferences just for psychoanalysts and analytic trainees in the Tavistock group relations method, and we're planning another one for October. And I'm also a mediator, basically a community mediator. And the connection between those two has been really intriguing to me because I feel like there's a danger of complexifying what it takes to have a good dialogue. And some of the very classic mediation techniques are quite simple. And although they may not get to the full complexity of the unconscious dynamics that causes a dispute to happen, particularly around neighbors or within families, one can see the source of a lot of war starts with neighbors and within families. And doing that work has been very helpful to me in terms of then working with large groups. I've also done some consultation with analytic institutes and find it quite intriguing the difficulty that the dynamics in the institutes have in working through their own conflicts and secrets and confidentialities and competitions, and the reality that that has impact on what happens in the consulting room, on the couch. So that institutes increasingly are starting to confront the groups around the sociological surround, and even the conflict between the IPA and the American Psychoanalytic includes some of this question about group work. And so that the work that we started with in the US around group dynamics has also spread to Europe. So there's a conversation that's going on that I think is reminiscent of sort of the larger cultural. One of the things that I bring into my group relations work, both online and in person, is creativity. So I work a lot with embodied work, with art, with music, as a way to sort of explore differences and dynamics beyond words. And that's been very fruitful in terms of having conversations. And I'll say 2 more things. There are a lot of initiatives, including psychoanalysts, around some of this conflict resolution, including an organization called the International Dialogue Institute. And I really encourage people to have a look at the work that those folks are doing. I've also been involved in some of the dialogue work that's going on between Israeli and Palestinian and Pakistani youth, where they come together for a month and they do dialogue and sharing. And a lot of work has been done around sharing stories, because that's kind of the essential way in which we connect. Years ago, I was involved in a project where a community in the Pacific Northwest was having a fight between fishermen, loggers, and environmentalists around resources. And the way in which that conflict was resolved was creating a theater piece that involved all members of the community as actors. And in the theater piece, they not only got a chance to work together and to explore the taking up a role, but also to work through the conflict. So it was an incredibly interesting, creative way to work on the systemic dynamics. And as a result of that, they came up with a kind of groundbreaking agreement between all the conflicting parties. So that's a little bit of an overview. I'm excited to join this conversation. Thank you for inviting me.
Excited to have you. Thank you.
I'll go.
Sorry, you can go.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Cameron Williams. I'm a psychiatrist and psychoanalytic candidate in Baltimore. And let's see, I've been interested in the socio-political things since I was a little boy, growing up in New Orleans. And New Orleans was kind of always a little blue dot in the deep South. But then we moved to Pensacola, Florida when I was 8, which all of a sudden I was the only kind of liberally raised kid surrounded by a bunch of conservative kids, because Pensacola, Florida is quite conservative. And I've kind of gone back and forth through my life, kind of being around other people who seem to think the way more like how I think. And then, like, again, in medical school, I went to Louisiana State, where they get students from all over Louisiana. And a lot of those people have very different socio-political views than I do. And so entering analytic training around 2020, I was well, I became disillusioned to a degree in the way it seemed psychoanalytic principles were being employed to try to help deepen our understanding of human uh, relationships and like on a grander cultural social scale. I it dawned on me slowly over the period of kind of a few years that I kind of didn't think we were achieving the things I was hoping we would achieve by leaning into the cultural or leaning into the political. And I was all in favor of engaging in the political analytically. And who was I to say the Analytic Institute wasn't being analytical? I mean, I was a beginning trainee, but my my sense of that has not really changed. And I will say also, as a psychiatry resident 7 or 8 years ago, I got to do a 2-week rotation with Lord John Alderdice, who is an analyst and a member of the House of Lords in England, who he occasionally lets psychiatry residents shadow him, and he works on intractable sectarian conflicts around the world. He was instrumental in the Northern Irish peace process, where the idea is you get people who have been violently disagreeing with each other for hundreds of years, and you get them to just talk and keep talking. And to me, that seemed like the model that I believed would help in this country, at least. And I just didn't feel like that's what I saw. I feel like what I see is, and again, this is public, so I don't know who's ever going to see this, but frankly, coming from New Orleans, Louisiana, originally, by way of Pensacola, Florida, I see a lot of highly educated, well-intentioned, upper class elitists kind of talking down to ordinary people who I think are a lot of our patients too. So I find that, and I haven't met a whole lot of people who openly will say that, and I hope I hope I'm not in trouble for saying it publicly.
I agree.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I guess I'm the last to go. You're not in trouble for saying it at all, because I too, I think I am, maybe I'm a lapsed liberal. I don't know what I call myself, because I don't really fit into either category. And I think being not fitting into either category has made me be able to be sort of open to everything. I noticed, during the the 6 months before the election, I started listening to different podcasts. I started listening to conservative podcasts. I started reading about immigration from very conservative thinkers. A lot of Black conservatives I read, and I found there is a perspective that is not being approached at all in my analytic world. And it's been an incredibly lonely experience for me. I have read much of the listserv, and I know it's public, and there have been so many things that I had wanted to say, but I never could say anything. I felt it was so hostile. I had never seen so much hate in my life in any other situation. And I never felt comfortable being part of that listserv. And I've nearly wanted to get out of APSA, but I kind of stay in because I really want to hear what's being said, even if it's painful to hear. And I was on Alice's group, but was it during the pandemic sometime, on religion? And it was a fascinating group. And as terrified as I am to speak publicly before all these hostile people in the not this group, but the greater group, I do trust Alice, and I'm looking forward to a meaningful discussion.
Michelle, but tell us just a little more about you. Where are you located?
Oh, sorry. I am a New Yorker. I live in Riverdale, New York. I used to have my practice on the Upper West Side until the pandemic, and now I'm working online, and I spend my winters in Boca Raton, Florida. I also am very interested in group work. I run groups for people with chronic pain, and that has been very interesting because these are people all across the country, from people who would not normally go to therapy. And I've learned so much from them, from their perspective, and hearing people from, people who normally don't go to analysts, people in the military, police officers, firefighters, general regular people who are really talking about everything. And we tend to sometimes talk towards politics, but there's an understanding, and there's a certain amount of respect. And I think the greater world, as troubled as it is doing a lot better than these analytic places that are offering no nuance, very, very intimidating. And I don't understand how that could be part of an analytic ideal. Now I've really outed myself, and everybody in Abt can hate me, so it's done.
I'd like to throw something out. I hadn't thought about this, so maybe I'll take it back later. I followed some of the listserv stuff too for a while, and I guess I was struck by how much trauma people had experienced and brought into the work they were doing and the thoughts they were having. We didn't really discuss trauma, especially in our first conversation with this group that's now meeting today with some new folks. But I think that's something I would welcome to bring in to the room. Not necessarily at this moment, but at some point.
In what way can you say a little more about how we can use it?
Well, I've been struck by how many folks who've gone into the field of mental health or psychiatry or related disciplines have either experienced trauma themselves or have a family history of trauma. I've been reading lately a few books, both within the field and outside, regarding the effects of trauma. And I think that it's another big exclamation point in our discussion, in the same way that you said women, art, and God was an exclamation point, were exclamation points for you in the last session. And Katrina has said religion is an exclamation point for her, meaning important and can't be ignored and has to be addressed. And I think trauma is obviously another one for me from my perspective.
I think joining with you, Lynn, in my experience, virtually all of the conversations that I've had in groups around difference or diversity involves either some level of wounding or trauma, and that it becomes very difficult to have conversations unless the space is created to acknowledge the shared injuries that folks all have, regardless of where they're coming from.
Right.
Well, that was one of my contributions last time, which was that I thought that one big psychoanalytic idea that I thought we could offer the world, if we could somehow make it translatable to the average person, is Melanie Klein's idea of the depressive position. And that if we—
That was brilliant, what you said before.
Sorry?
That was brilliant, what you
Oh.
said in the last session about that.
Thank you.
Depressive, paranoid. Yeah, I loved that.
But the idea that we are all wounded, right? And so often we turn to the paranoid schizoid position and get angry and want to emphasize difference and feel paranoid and what you're doing this to me, instead of we're all in this together. So
Mhm.
that's creating a psychological space for that concept somehow for us to sit in together.
Mhm.
I think we often blur the distinctions between individual trauma and collective trauma. And sometimes I think people try to heal from individual by joining with a group and feeling, if I'm part of a group that's more righteous, more truthful, more good, or something, then it's a way of trying to heal as individuals. And that's what makes the group so sticky and so hard to change, because you have the individual people and then you have the dynamic of the collective.
Mhm.
I saw that on the APSO listserv with the Israel Gaza thing, and the president had to resign because of this mass wave. And how we address that, well, you need to honor people's experiences. If it's an individual person, we have an idea how to deal with trauma by honoring it, empathizing with it, challenging aspects of it a little bit at a time. In large groups, it's very hard to do that. There's two people on my Facebook page, one who's a Muslim woman who embraces Islam and feels very religious, and the other is a Christian man who says Islam is evil. I was in Afghanistan. I saw those people. They're violent. They're terrible people, and this is her religion. This is her identity, and it's painful to witness this conflict between them. What do you do when it goes there? And she'll say it's America who's evil because they invaded us and they're killing random good people in the name of some perceived Islamic devil.
Mhm.
It's
But is it also the case that social media, or I'm not on Facebook, somehow pulls more for a kind of no holds barred aggression that we would not express if we were face to face with people?
so, yeah.
And also maybe the loudest voices, because let's face it, most of us. So Michelle, I'll tell you that I follow the APSA meeting, the APSA listserv. I cannot look away. I am fascinated by it. But I did venture finally, in the last 3 years to say a few things. And what I say is very moderate.
I've read yours.
I'm a centrist, right? And I actually got a kick out of the fact that some people seem to now remember my name when I went to the American Psychoanalytic meetings in February last year, and I'm going to go to this one in February coming next month in San Francisco. So I don't know. I mean, I think the people who feel moderate don't usually post.
Right.
And we have a misconception about where people stand.
Exactly. I think it's a very small minority who are causing all the trouble, but they cause a lot of trouble.
Mm.
It also has
But
to do with
on both sides on this.
it also has to do with who is moderate. I'm very aware that I'm a white man, a psychiatrist, heterosexual. If I ought to be really left if I'm going to speak, and if I'm not really left, and put being an ally front and center of like everything I say. But what if I don't think that way? I think the way I think, and been thinking the way I am who I am, and I have heard messages, in classes that, well, it doesn't really matter what you think because of who you are, because of what you look like, and I'm sorry, but I think that is not moving forward. I understand that white straight men have had a lot of advantages, but and that's the understatement of the day. But I mean, we are here now. We're all trying to be respectful people who can share our thoughts, and it's very shaming to be
Mhm.
told because of your identification, because of your identificatory statistics, we don't care what you think.
Were you able to say that or something like that to the person who said that?
It caused it was hostile. I mean, the whole situation was like the listserv, but in a class, in a series of classes on Zoom.
No, I agree with what you're saying. I find that this whole diversity push has really created so many problems. Because it's diversity unless you're religious or a conservative or a moderate even. I'm not even saying a conservative, let's say a moderate. It's you know, all the reading lists when they had all, remember, you know, they had all the reading lists, we had reading groups, everything was very left. And some of the stuff was that I, you know, I joined these things because I'm interested in hearing what people have to say. But I have, you know, I have never felt so lonely. And, you know, I finished my training. I'm a member, I'm part of leadership of my institute. But I'm really, you know, I really like, after October 7th, I was like really the only person on the board who stood up for Israel, things like that. You know, it's been a really, really difficult experience, a lonely experience to be an analyst with the views that I have, which I don't consider to be terribly extreme either.
I'm really shocked that you had this experience. I've been part of a COVID, APSA-supported COVID group that has met for the last 4 years. We meet weekly. We're all women, one very brave man. And it's been wonderful, therapeutically for me and professionally. And I would say everyone in our group was sympathetic and supportive of Israel. It was 2/3 Jewish, and I didn't hear anybody. I'm sorry that you felt lonely. That sounds pretty.
I mean, it wasn't like I wasn't supported, but it was a whole discussion about whether we should put something out or say something, and then we did, and then there was a lot of vitriol coming after, you know, because people have very different points of view and can't talk to each other about it. I think I exaggerated. I think there were a lot of people that support, but I feel that I'm the one always that's bringing it up. And I am not such an activist, so it's a very uncomfortable situation for me to be in. You know, because I don't want to, you know, cause more problems in the situation. And this whole Israel-Palestinian situation is very hard to talk about. And then I've spoken with people about it, and I'm not sure that we can talk about it right now. Like it may be just too far apart. Now, you know, Jack, you probably know more about, you know, these kind of very difficult situations. But I have found that our attempts to talk about it have not been helpful, and have in fact been quite hurtful.
My sense is that there is a kind of sweet spot somewhere with folks who are open, that can have the conversation, and that beyond that sweet spot, it is probably more destructive than productive.
So how do we apply that to, you know, Democrats versus Republicans or left versus right? Isn't that the same problem that we're looking for? How do we extend the sweet spot or define it even?
Yeah. I mean, the degree to which this past election depended on independent votes, where they swung to some degree, there's probably a middle zone of folks there. But I think everyone has such a strong investment in being part of their tribe.
Yeah.
And the consequence of stepping out of the group. I mean, one of the principles in the core of the group relations work coming from Beyond is that we have this desperate desire to belong to a group, and at the same time, a desire not to be lost into the group. And that ambivalence is sort of part of how we kind of stay connected, and at the same time feel the pull to be disconnected. So I think to be truthful in these conversations, when you're in a community, the pain of exile is so great that I think we're willing to say yes to things that we don't really believe also. And as an outsider kind of lurking on the listserv of APSA, it's been really fascinating to sort of see the vitriol, which is not unique to APSA.
Funny, I find myself, I try to position myself between opposing forces. And it's not that hard because I come from worlds where, you know, half the people I know are liberals, the other half are conservatives. They're Catholics, they're Jewish, they're Muslims. I kind of am very familiar with people who are close to me, who embrace different perspectives.
Mhm.
So I sort of get it. But when I try, you know, on a listserv or on Facebook to say, to question someone or something, I get this instant wave of, Alice, are you one of those? How dare you? And then I have to start defending myself when I was just
I know.
sharing a different perspective, and it gets really weird.
I think part of it is because on the internet, you're not seeing a person, you're not talking to them in real time. There is no shame at what anybody is saying. There's no taking responsibility. So part of it is the medium, I think.
Mhm.
Because I have to say now I felt badly because when I was talking about my institute, because we actually did come together to talk as the board, not the whole institute, but as our board came together, we had some of the richest discussions about racism. So it's not that we can't, but I think the large group is much harder to rein in or to have a meaningful discussion. And I think there is, well, large groups are harder to reach in terms of, this is very personal stuff and controversial stuff. So maybe it's like a series of small groups is the beginning to start something bigger rather than to, you know, aim so big at first.
I have a visceral negative reaction to words that end in ism or phobia.
Yeah.
Because they're instantly divisive. You know, APSA has been throwing around the word racism since, you know, the Holmes Commission. And, you know, the report was fascinating, but it was also, the word racism was in almost every paragraph. And it really feels like it's hard to question it because this is a bad thing is in every paragraph. And, you know, if I want to speak out loud a feeling that I might have about a group of people who happen to be from, you know, Black people, I'm going to feel like the whole entity is going to come down on me like I'm this horrible racist person. And you can't talk when that language gets in the way.
Mm-hmm.
Sexism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, Islamophobia, transphobia, all of that. You know, if you call me transphobic because I question whether this 9-year-old should be getting puberty blockers, I'm rendered mute.
Yeah, I agree with you, Alice. I mean, it's it's essentially name calling, and it's a way of shutting down the conversation rather than engaging with the substance of what the other person is saying. You know, along those lines, one idea I've sort of been cultivating in my mind for some time is this idea of social contagion. And I think an organization like APSA and secular modernity in general as a whole is really vulnerable to various social contagions. You know, it's kind of like your phone update, right? It's 2.1, 6.5, 7.1, whatever. And each one is, you know, we've got BLM, we have men can become women, we have, Trump is Hitler, right? And it's these sort of, sort of software updates kind of downloaded into the organization or into kind of our secular modern society as a whole. And people kind of take it and they run with it. And it seems like there's sort of no, there's nothing higher, there's no bigger structure to check them, to check that belief against a a more overarching belief system, right? I think that this is what happened when Freud took, that sort of said it's all contained within the individual. It's all contained within the human person. Id, ego, superego is sort of the new Father, Son, Holy Spirit, right? But it's all contained within the individual. There's no greater metaphysics. And I think as a result, people are really vulnerable to whatever the programming of the day is. And then they see whoever's questioning the programming of the day, that person or group is seen as evil.
I agree with you, Katrina, that we have to hope that there's some kind of overarching philosophy or more sense of what's morally correct. And I understand that it did grow out of what I would call the Judeo-Christian tradition, and uh, certainly there are other religions that I don't know as well. That must also have been founded on the idea of how do we make people get along with each other? How do we make sure that our tendency to being aggressive is moderated or neutralized by our need for each other? So I want us to continue to talk about what I think you brought up, which is extremely fundamental to our issue. I think how is our country going to fall apart because we have moved away from religion towards secular, what you could say, capitalistic, more not morality, but capitalistic ideals? Like the biggest thing is to make a buck, right? Never mind who you hurt on the way. But I also think that we've lost something in terms of how we teach our children to evaluate the things that are coming at them. We used to have civics lessons. We had a lot more educating of a child's mind to be able to decide for himself or herself what's right and what's wrong. There's so much garbage that comes at us on television, if you're watching television, or on your cell phone. Those of us who are old enough to remember a time when that wasn't the case, we can look at it and say, you've got to be kidding me. But we know that it's affecting teenagers and 20-year-olds in a different kind of way. And I don't know how we change that. And I'm not sure that it's like when analysts are the ones who.
Yeah, well, that's like a social media. I mean, I don't know I haven't really read Jonathan Haidt's book about the anxious generation yet. But these children don't have room to think. There's no space to think. They're on social media all day. Who knows what they're doing with TikTok and all these other things. And so and the adults too are addicted to this technology. So people now don't sit down and read books even.
Yeah.
They just go on their quick little things. We have a very anti-analytic world, if you want to look at it that way.
Oh, good point.
Yeah.
Space. Cameron, you started to say something a minute ago, and then I wonder where you were going to go.
Oh, thank you, Lynn. Yeah, I had a few ideas that I'm trying to keep a hold on. Okay. Well, one that you got in my head was the idea of what Katrina was saying about Christian traditions, and I mean, I counteroppose that with it. I mean, I'm not I don't read all the latest in psychoanalytic publications. I know there are a number of publications. It sure seems to me like there's a very socialist atheist bent to the energy behind psychoanalysts under the age of, I don't know, 45. And why is that? Like if there's a new analytic publication that everyone's excited about, why is it an atheist socialist publication? Where's the analytic energy in the heartland, so to speak, or the Judeo-Christian side of analytic thinking? I mean, is that social media? It's just that we all see, the world is in such trouble with climate change and hatred, and we're all kind of burrowing into our social network, finding the most kind of uh, hardcore answers, which would be communism or hardcore atheism. and then finding others who feel the same way. It certainly seems like young people are very drawn to things like communism, where, I mean, I don't know, if you look at the 20th century, communism doesn't really have that great of a track record, I don't think. So that was one thing I was thinking. Another thing I was thinking was, as we talk about the Holmes Commission and kind of a lot of the DEI things that have been happening at all of our institutes, one thing that has uh, disappointed me as a new analytic person, candidate over the last few years, I don't see the difference between how APSA or psychoanalytic institutes bring up the major issues of, all the isms, racism. How do we add to that more so than how people are talking about these issues at any other organization in the country? The board of directors of Amazon, or the liberal arts department at Barnard College, or, like, what are we adding to it? It wasn't clear to me that we were really, I mean, do you know what I'm saying? Like, it just seemed like kind of more of the same kind of thinking that everything else in the culture in the country was very de rigueur starting about 5 years ago, and it's being called analysis, but it's really just kind of everywhere. Social contagion, perhaps an element of groupthink, or everyone kind of arriving at the same place at the same time. So there's that. And okay, and this is the big one here that I really wanted to get to. I said things about earlier that I need to be an ally because of my identity and things like that. I believe I am an ally. Like, I am pro-gay, pro-diversity. My problem, as someone who's been following politics closely since I was 7 years old, I don't think this works very well. Like, if we really want to help move things where we want them to go, making everyone feel like they can't say what they really think or they're going to get punished, how is that going to get us where we need to go? I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, I believe I've been calling it for years that, like, well, if this keeps going on, all the swing voters are going to vote for Trump, and look and it happened. So I just think it doesn't work. It's like I am learning proper psychoanalytic technique as a candidate. A lot of the things that I, in my kind of gut, thought would help patients, turns out, there's a reason that it's a multi-year process, very labor intensive, very difficult process of becoming an analyst, because you want to help people, and some of the things you think you can do to help people, it's complicated and multifaceted. And the same thing here. Like, we can just tell everyone how they need to think about everything all the time, but you can't do that with patients. We don't have patients come in and we tell them all their thoughts are wrong, and we tell them what they need to think instead, and we punish them if they don't get with the program. I mean, okay, so there's that too. I just don't think it's effective on a society level, or it certainly wouldn't be effective with an individual patient, I don't think.
Well, but it's coming from both sides. I mean, I thought of the most effective part of Trump's campaign was the emphasis on trans children, and how I heard this from a patient. I don't watch football, but he said that in the football, the Super Bowl, or one of those big games, there were commercials for Trump's presidency, and it was, your child's going to go off to school and come back a different gender, or different sex, sorry, come back a different sex, playing to the most basic castration anxiety, if you will, that we all would have, most of us would have, around the idea of having our very core sexual self threatened. So you take, and that's the culture war stuff, right? You take something, I think you exaggerate it, you don't base it on fact, and the average person is going to be, what is it that called? The dopamine, the cortisol is rising, and that's going to shape your thinking.
I think one of the things that I was hearing is that the liberals were trying too hard to mandate a morality Don't think these thoughts, care about these people and be generous to those people and empathize with those people, and, don't say any negative things. And Trump bypassed that and says, I'm going to say what I want. If I think you're a low IQ person, I'm going to say you're a low IQ person. Live with it. People like that, or they like it, but
there was authenticity to it.
authentic. Yeah, it's what an analyst strives to do over a period of time slowly. He went right there. And so there was something analytic about what he was doing that reached to a level of, allowing people to speak their thoughts aloud. And it horrified the liberals, but it also it made them, more extreme in a way that I think against them.
Demagoguery and hatred are very serious problems, and having someone with sociopathic tendencies like Trump appealing to these parts of people is very serious. But that's why it's all the more important that we, fire our best shot, that we really get our act together and about how we are to
Cameron,
combat it.
I'm curious, yeah, if we, and maybe this is to Sylvia's point earlier too, but what is our best shot? What does psychoanalysis actually have to offer people?
I think that place where I'm sorry, you were asking for Cameron.
Well, I don't know. I think someone who lives out in the middle of the country in Tennessee ought to be able to talk to someone who lives on the Upper West Side and find some sort of common humanity, and not, no one's up on a pedestal.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I guess I'm just very skeptical that psychoanalysis can really offer people anything valuable to deal with these complex life and sociopolitical kind of questions, given that we can't even get our own house in order. You all talked at length about the listserv and what's happening on the listserv. I mean, if we can't get our own listserv in order, how can we really offer people anything valuable? And I think that this is sort of it does seem to me that what psychoanalysis has been trying to do, what the left has been trying to do, is to impose this kind of new, this neo-morality on people that is based on false premises, and that they've, that the common man in the US at least has roundly rejected.
I don't know how much the common man cares about what psychoanalysts think.
A lot of people really don't think much of what psychoanalysts think.
But I think we do have that place where in our individual work, you try to get people to put into words forbidden thoughts. And I think if we could find a permutation of that, where somebody who, thinks Israel is committing genocide can say to Michelle and Sylvia, this is how I feel. And you listen, and then you talk back and share your perspective, and the other person listens, and then you move from there.
And you don't call the person who says that anti-Semitic.
Exactly. You put all of those labels aside and you honor the lived experience and the psychic reality
of an individual, right?
And I don't think that would be so hard to market. It would be hard to put into practice, but I think there's a model in there that we can use. And it's just people getting to know each other and not just stopping with common humanity, because we always say that, but that's sort of superficial.
But I think also, Alice, what we need is a little bit of some kind of what is the word? It's not like it's like the normal use of false self, to be respectful of people when you're talking, and to check yourself before you're going to say something that might be problematic. I think that, we have to have, I think all of the like the gloves are off. That's one thing that Trump did for all of us, and that people just say anything on all sides of the aisle, and it's really very counterproductive.
Exactly. Yeah, it has to be a safe space where people are willing to do it in a way that's going to be tolerated and on both sides and go somewhere. It's like being analysts to each other.
Well, on APSA, there was a meeting right after the election. And I think Dan Kruzan said something like, well, is there anybody here who voted for Trump? Do you think that anybody who voted for Trump in that meeting would have said, oh, I did? I mean, I found that very upsetting. I was very, very upset. That really, really bothered me.
I misunderstood. I heard it totally differently, Michelle.
Okay.
I heard him saying that there could very well be Trump voters among us, but they would never feel safe enough to say it.
Then, isn't that interesting?
That's how I heard him say it. I do not think he said what you heard.
But isn't that interesting? Because that my experience there was just that experience. So everybody has a different experience to what they hear. And I think that is an important thing to take in mind. We know that as analysts, that how we're heard is different for everybody.
Also, I wanted to go back to something, Katrina, that you said. I don't think, I would not agree with the statement, we cannot even put our own house in order, so how do we expect to be able to, help anybody else? I don't see the listserv as evidence that the APSA's house is not in order. I see it as evidence that there's a lot of people with strong feelings, some very articulate people who have more time on their hands than I do to write emails. Many of them probably retired. They're no longer seeing patients. They have a lot of time. But I'm not sure what it means to have one's house in order. And I think I'm more in favor of a little disorder than too much order.
Point taken.
Interesting.
Yeah, point well taken. I think I'm sort of saying two things. One is that so many of the beliefs and the positions espoused by APSA these days are based on false premises. It's all of the isms that Alice was referring to earlier, kind of seeing racism, just in every interaction, no matter how innocuous, the accusations of homophobia, Islamophobia, transphobia, etc. Right? All of these, I think of them as false premises. Number one. Number two, I think the internal division, a house so divided, I think ultimately cannot stand. There doesn't seem to be much uniting a group of analysts anymore. And I think the back and forth and the infighting on the listserv is just a symptom of that.
Well, actually, I think too much, there was a lot of uniting when so many analysts were European extraction, Jewish, right? And it's the breaking of that. It's the new younger generation that's coming in, many more non-Jews. Or one time, I forget who it was, but he called somebody who had an exotic name. He used the word exotic. So there's also this generational stuff, right? Where the old people have to catch on with the fact that the world has changed so much that if when you listen to a podcast, or you read an article in a newspaper, people aren't changing their names when they come here. They have very intense, clearly Persian, Iraqi, Persian, Indian, Arabic, and they don't change their names the way people did 50 years ago to fit into American world. And so our America is changing. You cannot, and that's, I guess, what my particular take on the MAGA position is that it is it's the nostalgia for what used to be, and it's the anxious response to too much change too quickly. My personal thought is that Obama should not have been that ambitious. He should have let Hillary win the presidency. He had plenty of time to become president later, but he did it. I think he was fantastic, but he created the backlash against a black president, and we are in the mess that we're in.
That's an interesting perspective. Yeah. See that, Lynn? I think maybe you were going to say something.
have so many thoughts in my head right now that I'm not sure I can say anything, but I'm really circling back around to what Sylvia said in the last meeting that we had, talking about the depressive position, the paranoid, schizoid position. I made a New Year's resolution that I was not going to be snarky this year because I have a real snarky sense of humor. But I found myself being snarky on Facebook only yesterday. So I lasted a few days. But what I find myself doing is going back and forth on that scale, taking a depressive, humble position. I'm really, I love it when I'm able to do that because I feel much more at home with myself. And yet that power juice that comes on when I take kind of a little bit of a paranoid position and I am funny with it. I think, boy, I'm so cool. And I've heard several people talk about trying to be, well, Alice said, I've tried to be in the middle. And you've said that many times. I've heard you say that many times in between. I love this guy who, his name is Jakob Hamann. He's a member of the Divinity School faculty here at Vanderbilt, and he's also an analyst. He's from South Africa. He is a big Winnicott fan, and he wrote a book called Growing Down. Growing Down, it's kind of based on something Winnicott said. The title is Growing Down to Where You Can Fit Into That Small Hole. And he really, he does work with children a lot too. Talking about, and every time somebody wanted to say something? Oh, no, okay. Every time I pick up his book in bits and pieces and just kind of read it like a children's story or something. It's really great to me. And one of the things that happens every time I start to read him is I think of the small groups that I'm a part of, the places I feel really safe, the feeling I got when I first read Winnicott, which was like, hey, it's a free space, it's a safe space, it's a small space. And I think somebody in here today said something about maybe small groups to start with rather than big groups. I think that small group that's going downward into that small space is very intimate to me and very moving to me. I don't know if Sylvia's COVID group is like that, a small space where you feel safe and at home. And so I don't really have a point, but I'm just finding myself drawn to several angles in this conversation, several positions, and I'm trying to find a place for those in my small space, inward.
I'm trying to think what in particular the analytic world can contribute to the larger context. And maybe it has something to do with sort of acknowledging anxiety and defense against anxiety. That somehow a lot of things are driven around this sort of existential fear that a lot of people are holding coming from different places. And to sort of be able to name that and to name the way in which the economics have created a kind of a biological experiment with all the online media that basically creates an incentive to create anxiety in order to make money, to keep people engaged. That there's a sort of a meta system that's going on that really has to do with anxiety and defense against anxiety that really is a kind of primal force that maybe we can be helpful in speaking about in a way that's comprehensible, because I think pretty much everyone shares that. I do a kind of thought experiment from time to time to try to say, like, what of the right-wing positions can I connect to? And, I can pretty quickly get to a place of, annihilation anxiety if all of a sudden everyone around me doesn't look like me and doesn't share the same background. I can get to that, even though I should be able to be open to all the diversity. I realize that there's a way in which I feel more comfortable with people who look like me, and to not diminish that. And so there's an anxiety component to that I think people can share and speak to maybe more explicitly than we do now.
It requires being really honest, that's the hard thing today, that it's hard to really be honest about what you feel.
That's right. And you have to be, it has to be a two-way street, because we're entitled to be anxious. If I say something in the wrong way to the wrong person, they're going to blast me on social media, or, in a way that there's a couple of people who will do that. Alice is wrong. If I say the sky is blue, they're going to tell me I'm wrong.
Yes, and it's same people. You can tell that when I see a certain name, I know what's coming. It's like stereotyped even.
Yeah, absolutely. It's weird. So the anxiety is partially internal, but partially justified, which is why I think if we can create a model where there are safe spaces for people to say hard things. If I'm uncomfortable around the Black person, I want to say there's something about you, whether it's your culture. I don't think it's your color. I think it's that you come from a different center, and there's something I feel uncomfortable about. And I want you to hear me, and I want to be able to hear you when you tell me you're uncomfortable around me. But we don't have a place where people can actually do that. The other thing that I think is, we're losing our moral compass and our reality testing. I'll get articles about, read this is truth. I don't know. I have no idea if any fact that somebody sends me is a fact. And morally, the arguments about who's more morally right, the Israel-Palestinian thing, I hear these very dissonant, arguments about, who's justified in killing children. Where's morality? Where's God? Where's our center of gravity as a, where's our identity as a people? When I can't decide who to vote for because one person's going to kill this group and the other person's going to kill that group. Where are we?
If I observe a point of view that seems to be, or like affects in a kind of a socio-political discourse, it seems to be coming from like a paranoid, schizoid frame of mind. I'm not swayed. I try not to be swayed by it, even if I kind of agree with kind of at least a lot of their like goals. But if it's an argument that is distorted in that way, like not from a depressive position, but like, do we have to go along with paranoid, schizoid social movements? Because you're not allowed to question where it's coming from. And then Lynn mentioned trauma. I mean, I think there's a lot early on. I mean, I think there's a lot of personal trauma that gets mobilized in the service of kind of these intense political feelings that we have. I mean, I relate to that. Like my own views are personal, projected onto the world, and a lot of the time. And but we're not allowed to say we're losing our creativity to just be flexible and have space. It's more like those yard signs in people's yards. It's like a catechism. We believe Black Lives Matter, trans rights. It's like just believe these 10 things and you're good, and we're done here. And like, okay.
The other thing is that all of these groups are not monolithic. There are Black people who are very, very upset with BLM.
Yes. John McWhorter is.
I love John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry. I would love, we had these reading groups. I was like, why don't we read any conservative Blacks?
And John McWhorter is not a conservative.
No, he isn't. He's just normal.
He's just sort of bad.
Well, no, what would you call him? Libertarian? What
Well,
would you call him?
he's I would call him a classic liberal, like, you know, like Martin Luther King. I mean, like just what liberalism was in the 90s when I was growing up.
But part of it is to go along with what Alice is saying. I mean, we use certain words that suddenly have become dirty words, like Zionism is a bad word, right? To turn things around, and depending on who's hurling it. But
Yeah.
it's no longer descriptive, it's a label, right?
Yeah.
George Carlin was probably my first. I mean, I love George Carlin, and you know, he was all about. I mean, it used to be liberalism was the people trying not to censor people,
Mhm.
and now it's the opposite. And
Well,
and the people have noticed, and that's part of why Trump won, I think.
There was an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about Bill Maher, who is hated on both sides.
I love Bill Maher.
I love Bill Maher. It's a great article. It was a really good article.
I'll look it up. Thank you.
I mean, it's ironic that that would be the measure of someone who's threaded this needle to be hated on both sides.
I think
I
that's
think that's a joke. I think that's really correct.
Yeah.
I often feel that way myself.
Yeah, I was thinking of you, Alice.
They don't know what to make of me, and I'm a Rorschach, and they're gonna, you know.
Oh,
look at
good
me
point.
Well, in some ways, you know, there's a way to be non-binary politically.
Ah.
Love it. That's a great concept.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to call myself that.
A non-binary politician, huh?
Well, not a politician. I'm never going into
Okay,
politics.
yeah.
A non-binary voter. I guess that's an independent, though, isn't it?
Oh.
I like non-binary because it's new and it's jarring.
Yeah.
Like moderate,
Non-binary voter.
wishy-washy.
Well, another thing about, you know, what the media has been terrible. I mean, just, you know, the media is really in trouble. But what they say about people who voted for Trump, that they're stupid and they don't, you know, I have spent a lot of time reading a lot of Douglas Murray, who's a conservative. I don't know what he is, but he's written a lot about he considers this a war against the West, what's going on right now. And it's even bigger than just Israel and Palestine. And, you know, and look at what happened last weekend. I mean, there's a lot going on versus, you know, Western civilization and wanting to kill it and wanting to kill the good things about it, including psychoanalysis.
Yeah, Michelle, I like Douglas Murray a great deal. I've followed some of his writings, and I very much agree. I mean, maybe back to the point about the paranoid schizoid position. I mean, certainly we don't want to get stuck there, but some things are objectively good and some things are objectively evil. And I agree with thinkers like Murray who say that this is a war against the West and that this is a war against Western civilization. You know, and one of the things that's being destroyed, maybe this is the drum I keep beating, but Christianity and what Christianity has given us. And then maybe just a quick point to what Sylvia said earlier. I think you made a really important point about what Obama did and Obama's legacy. And I think there's something to this idea, I think that kind of dovetails with this, with the war against the West, but the rapid pace of change. People can't adapt. And nor should they have to adapt to this rapid pace of change. With their country, their customs, you know, everything they've grown up with is being systematically eroded and destroyed.
Well, but that's the question. Is it systematically being eroded, like somebody's out to do it, or is it something that's happening by natural, natural change? And yes, demographic shifts, but I have my own personal little, silly reaction to something about how the world has changed. Like, it's no longer Aunt Jemima pancakes, right? I grew up with Aunt Jemima pancakes. And when I understood that that's the image of the mammy, and the mammy is associated to slavery, and Black people find it offensive, and now it's just called, I think, General Mills or some kind of Mills mix. Or the other one is Uncle Ben's rice, right? So these are the things that we might miss. My parents came over from Europe, so I don't feel identified with the American history of slavery, except to the fact that I bought into the history as it was taught, without understanding so many other things that I have come to learn in the last 3 or 4 years by making a special effort to do so. But I understand that sense of, oh, I want to go back to the way things were. So that's what I think I agree with you, Jack. It would be really nice for us as analysts to emphasize the emotional piece, the anxiety, the defense against the anxiety. But I'm not sure we can fight change. I think we can acknowledge how scary change is. We can wish that it would be happening slower, but I don't know that we can actually stop it or reverse it.
But we do have original sins in this country: slavery and Native American genocide. I suppose might be appropriate there. Probably. And the fantasy that we can, by changing the name of Aunt Jemima, that's gonna fix it. Like, whether we have Aunt Jemima or not, that's not. I mean, that is like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Like, I bet if you polled Black Americans, I mean, I don't know what I'm talking about now, but my hunch is most of them probably were fine with it being Aunt Jemima. And the idea that by getting rid of the name Aunt Jemima, we're helping undo the legacy of slavery is kind of like, no, 1,000 years from now, we're still going to have blood on our hands in this country, and we have to live with each other. I don't know. That just emerged from my gut. So
I would love to have gotten a poll. I'd love to know whether people who are Black, how they felt about the Aunt Jemima question. That's a really simple thing to find out, it would seem to me, if people were honest.
Well, as a child, this is really personal, but as a child, I had a housekeeper, and her husband and I didn't understand all this. I was like 8 years old. Okay, so her husband worked at some kind of some fast food place, and I made some kind of a joke as a child. Oh, like Aunt Jemima and Chef Boyardee. And she was so offended. Oh, wait a second, I have to plug in. Hold on. She was so offended. So I know that it's a real thing from that one early experience that I had. But I agree with you that we're not going to change the world by I'm just plugging in my iPad, which is, I don't know, but we're not going to change how people think. Another one of my conservative Black people that I follow is Glenn Lowry, who is a professor of economics at Brown. And my husband went to Brown, so I get the Brown Alumni Magazine, and he wrote an article a couple of years ago, and he said, all of this change has happened, but you cannot change people's attitudes inside. And sometimes when we do so much publicly in terms of changing how people think, there is much more of a rebellion internally. And I think that's happening. The more things have been forced on people, they're rebelling, and
well, actually,
sorry, go ahead, Sylvia.
What did you say, Sylvia? Say that
I would say that this morning, I haven't read the article, but my husband drew my attention to the headline in the Times of an op-ed that says, "Enough with the land acknowledgements." And so that's talking about virtue signaling, where we're not doing anything to actually help Native Americans economically or socially, right? But we think it's enough to say, I live on the unceded land of such and such, which always pisses me off when I read that.
We have 10 minutes. Is there a way that we can at least imagine some possible forward movement from this, some takeaway that could be different, useful? I mean, I like the idea of just having people stay together in a room who are different and get to know each other and their cultures and their and tolerate the discomfort of hearing things that are triggering. And yes, many of us have trauma and are exquisitely sensitive, but rather than safe spaces and don't think those thoughts, to come into a room knowing that somebody's going to think those thoughts and learning to get to know that person anyway.
Mhm.
And, I like to think that new perspectives can arise from just staying in the room. And it is a permutation of the analytic model where, very scary, unconscious transference threats emerge and ideally can be tolerated and given back and framed in a different way. And, something is resolved, some conflict or, paradox or is resolved as a result of that. I like to think that it's possible for, people to do that if we give them an idea and a structure and a model and just get to know each other. And if something goes wrong, you can figure it out. But I don't know.
Well, I think that's the key, getting to know each other.
Yeah, people start, they lead with, I don't agree with that, or you're wrong about that, or,
Mhm.
and then you've got a head-on collision between, different paradigms, different psychic realities. But if you get to know each other and you see how this person came to be who they are,
I think it's important to look into other initiatives, because I seem to remember some time ago, NPR or there's been a public dialogue program that's been going on for some times around bringing people together with a particular format. And I think analysts who then look into what these processes are could be helpful rather than reinventing. Because I think there's the danger of a certain amount of elitism around, well, only analysts who know how to do this kind of work. And I think there's other folks out there who have a lot of experience that we could connect with in a productive way.
absolutely. I know a lot of them. Matt has been interfacing with them. But I think, if APSA could come out and say, and have this as an initiative, it would make a difference.
Mhm.
Rather than a few people over here and a few people over there, and you're only going to get people who are sort of interested. But if it becomes a movement,
Mhm.
But the problem is the people who are the most interested in socio-political things in APSA tend to be a lot of the same people who are, if you disagree with them, they're shouting you down.
Yeah.
That's been my experience. So
but that's why
it
if
needs
we
to be
frame it
different people. It
differently and
needs to be
say,
different people in charge of it,
Yeah.
or they need to maybe modify their rigidity around that they're right about everything.
Well, one thing I want to say is that, we, to some degree, we avoided one of the potentially complex conversations within this group, which has to do with Katrina's idea about bringing Judeo-Christian morality. So we're even somewhat reluctant to take on some of these conversations that are complex and difficult.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to admire you, Katrina, tell you, Katrina, that I admire you because I think you may be the more conservative person in this group, and that puts you in the minority. Maybe not the only one, but the
I'm
more.
pretty conservative.
You think you're
Oh,
quite
yeah. I can't believe I said it out loud.
You must feel safe.
I've
What?
come to respect
Must feel
conservatives
safe.
more than I used to.
Yeah, I did feel safe. I did. I was nervous about, I was really nervous about, this being publicized, but I think I am a conservative. I think I've become a conservative. Also, and Alice mentioned in the last thing, and it didn't come up, I'm an Orthodox Jew. So coming from that perspective, I'm exposed to a lot more conservative thought.
I've been exposed to a lot of conservative thinkers, and I've learned so much from them. And what the liberals get is, oh, you're a white supremacist, or you're fascist, or what are you talking about? And that pushes me further in that direction, because I've been totally embraced by my conservative friends just because I'm curious about them.
Mm-hmm.
The liberals are like, get away from me, it just don't
Yeah, I don't quite understand why I know there's one person in particular who keeps saying that you are giving, I think it was when you were doing the thing with Bobby, the January 6th guy, that you were giving him a platform and that was dangerous. And I'm not sure why people feel threatened by what you're trying to do. That doesn't make sense to me.
Doesn't make any sense to me.
I mean, I may feel skeptical about what you can do, what you're going to accomplish, but I don't see it as dangerous.
Yeah, a lot of people do. But it, maybe we should think about meeting again in a couple months and actually talking about that issue, the one that we've been sort of avoiding today, the really charged one, and see if we can go somewhere with that and see what happens. Because I think
Doesn't it boil down to, not to be reductionistic, but that if you strongly feel something about one religion, does that de facto make you less tolerant of other people's religion? Or can we find a way to embrace the search for spirituality and respect that each of us might have very, very individual ways of pursuing that, but honoring it as an important part of the human experience?
Sure.
I'd like to talk to someone who's from a different perspectives and get to a point where we can wonder why at some point we want to kill each other. If you stop with, okay, you do you're Muslim, you're Jewish, I'm Christian. That's okay, but at some point those paradigms come into head-on collision. And
I'd like to take that up. Thank you, Jack, for reminding us that we skirted it a little bit today.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that up, and thanks for your kind comments, Sylvia. I appreciate it. I suspect, like Michelle, I've done a lot of reading, gone down a lot of rabbit holes. I've actually changed my mind on many important issues over the last several years, and I take the point about being conservative, or the word conservative. I actually don't prefer that term, because like a lot of other thinkers, I actually don't think that there's a whole lot to conserve in our current culture. I recently came across the term restorationist, and so maybe I'll embrace that, restorationist to something like the medieval period, which maybe that could be a whole other conversation.
Restore America again.
There you go. Yeah.